Network. We mentioned it earlier. I think this is the 40th year for the Big Iron Farm Show. Obviously a historic year, I think, in this time of COVID. For the Red River Farm Network, it's a big year as well. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, so it's been a great pleasure of serving this region for 25 years, and we're looking for the next 25 and beyond. We always like to take a look at what's going on in the land market, and when we take a look at this one, we're looking at the new normal in the land market. I think that's a term that certainly makes a lot of sense with what's happening in this very different world that we're in today. We have with us today Kyle Nelson, Dale Weston, and Scott Hitter, all from Farmers National Company, to give us some perspective on what's happening in this land and rental world. Kyle, let's start with you if we can. Just give us an idea. I think for the last few years we've had obviously some pretty challenging markets, but at the same time that the land market has held together pretty well. Do you see that trend continuing?
Well, time will tell, but so far it has. Each of the last few years we keep waiting for, an adjustment, and we've really been pretty stable. And, the same holds true right now, and in fact, in a lot of areas we see slight increases, especially for good quality land. And there's a number of factors with that. Crop insurance is one of them. Obviously, the ad hoc payments, disaster payments is another. And really, supply and demand is fairly much in balance. So the result of that is, for the most part, pretty stable, and even some increases in some areas, depending on where you're at.
We're in this COVID world, Dale. Has that impacted the land market any?
Well, we really haven't seen anything yet that says that COVID has affected, how land is going to be valued or selling. Getting back to a little bit of Kyle's point there, we keep saying that, land values are basically the same the last 4 or 5 years, but I think it's really important that people realize that there's been some different aspects that have caused those values to remain fairly stable. I mean, 16, 17, 18 for most of the area that we're in had a really good crop. So our high yields offsetted that low commodity price. We had some ad hoc payments, some MFP payments and things that kind of helped us out the last couple of years. This last year we had this current year we have the COVID payments. So I really think that the land market's going to be pretty strong going into this fall.
And you've started to see some sales, you said?
Yeah, the ones, we've had, I would say for the most part are strong, and even surprisingly strong. That's not just ours, but others we've seen, talked to some other real estate agents and so forth. So far, it's looking like that's the trend.
Scott, what are you seeing? You're in the Lisbon area?
Yes, that's right.
So do you see, do things differ where we are on a regional basis by location?
To a degree, they may a little bit. The same basic things apply, though. Quality land will tend to bring quality prices. Some of the lesser ground is less interest, it seems like. So the actual number, if you're at a sale, maybe the actual numbers of people showing up are down, but the active guys are still there.
Is there any trend that you're seeing as far as how land is being sold? We've seen more auctions. We've seen any change in the way we're getting land done?
Well, definitely the trend, I don't know, the last year or so has been online auctions. Of course, COVID perhaps necessitated that, but the trend was happening before that. And I always say, this is not generally an auction area. When the market really got hot, that was the way to do it, because none of us could peg, we'd think it was worth this, and it would go blow way beyond that. And an auction is, the best thing to have in that market, but things have moderated. You've got fewer number of buyers. Technology just changes that quick. An online platform, for a variety of reasons, is appealing, convenience, confidentiality, and that's become a more popular tool. It's not the only tool, and what we do is we try to tailor whatever land. There's not a one-size-fits-all So, you know, it could be that, it could be a live auction, it could be sealed bids, it could be a conventional listing, but certainly online auction in general has been probably the hottest thing.
Is there any certain kind of land that that's more attractive at this point?
Well, like Kyle said earlier, you know, the high quality land, you know, you're looking at a square quarter, square section, whatever it might be, with high productivity soils, good drainage characteristics, is always going to sell at very high levels. What I think Kyle would agree too is we've seen the discounts on the lesser quality land start to get that gap be bigger and bigger. When I talk lesser quality land, it might have saline soils, it might have irregular field boundaries, might have a slough, and probably not drained as well. So those type of parcels are the gap of where they're bringing in the dollars compared to the high quality is getting to be wider, and getting to be less and less buyers for those type of acres.
So who is the buyer of the land that we're seeing out there if that market has held together as it has?
We see farmers driving the market by and large. I mean, you hear about investors, they're out there. There's certain areas where there might be a void of competitiveness amongst the local farm operators, but generally, you know, when we see the strongest sales, it's usually farmer driven because they have emotion tied to it. An investor, it's usually going to come down to dollars and cents, and that emotion is less likely to be a factor. But, you know, the investors play an important role. They're still there, but it's still, we believe, a farmer-driven market.
You may have that piece of ground that butts up to yours that you've been looking at for how many years, and how many opportunities come your way that you would have it for sale.
Exactly, and that's the emotion part. And we always say, you know, Dale and I are appraisers, and you can't quantify that. So that's the factor that the farmer brings to the table. It's not, it's emotion.
We have a bit of a strong commodity or area right around Fargo for purchase of land too, because we got this diversion going through, right?
Yeah.
And so we have buyout of land that's getting bought out at above market levels. Well, they have 3 years to reinvest those dollars into more land. And, you know, as we all know, not every person that's getting bought out is an active farmer, but those landowners still have an attachment to land, and they want to buy more land. And it's pretty consistent that we have people calling, asking about the purchase of additional land in the geographic area of Fargo because they're getting bought out.
I bet. Scott, I'm curious, we talked about in that last session about the amount of PP ground that we've had here over the last year or two. From a land sale perspective and even from a rent perspective, has that prevent plant been an issue or a consideration?
Well, I do quite a bit of farm management, you know, in lease negotiations annually. There's pockets where I'm in southeast North Dakota where the amount of prevent plant there's some big percentages of prevent plant. What we're seeing right now, for the most part, is it hasn't been a negative impact. Where we are running into some issues, we've got some pockets. You get down in that Fullerton area, North American, up in those countries, and where it's been wet consistent, at some point in time, you run out of prevent plant. And when you lose that capacity,
rest of that is a lot more palatable, but I definitely see a difference in value. You know, $500 an acre in tile, you know, might add 1,000 or 1,500 in value in some of those areas. So it's a very regionalized thing. But I want to be clear. I'm an advocate of drain tile. I've seen that from day one. It's still relatively new for us.
You mentioned appraisal. Educate me, what's the purpose of the appraisal?
Well, you know, there's a lot of different factors that people might need an appraisal. It seemed like it always was for estate work, you know, date of death valuation, so people could figure out their estate tax potentially, or get a step up in cost basis. That used to be a bulk of our work. I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately, but we've seen a large increase in lending appraisal work in the last 12 to 18 months. Now, I don't know if that's because of lower interest rates, trying to lock in more long-term debt. I guess we're not privileged to know that. We're just asked to go out and evaluate that land. One of the areas I've seen the appraisal business step up in as well is the gifting of land. There's a lot of folks that are at that point where they want to gift their land to their kids, and in order to do that and stay under the federal exemption for estate tax, they want to get an appraisal done on that land. So there are multiple reasons why people get an appraisal on farmland, and it always is amazing to me. There's a lot of folks that forgot to get the date of death valuation on a piece of land, and it might be 1997, and now they're coming to sell that parcel, and they're like, would you have the ability to go back? And we typically do in this fairly local region, but it's time consuming. So I really encourage people to get that appraisal done when it should be done, you know, at the estate time.
That value on our tax statement, does that give us at least a starting point, or what? How does that factor in?
Depends. It depends on, obviously, North Dakota, that tax value is irrelevant to what its market value is. It's completely different. South Dakota, pretty much the same thing, because it's based on number. It's based on sales, but it isn't based on sales. Minnesota, it's probably accurate as long as you got a typical property and the market is stable. It's not going to react as things go up and down, and it's not going to factor unique influences. They're probably going to just look at soil type and have no idea if the drainage of that farm is good or bad or otherwise. If it's severed, which usually the market accounts for in a discount, access and whatnot, that assessed market value is not going to reflect that. So I guess ideally that's where we come in, because we have that knowledge of unique situations.
So what is the best way to determine that value of the land?
Well, comparable sales, and that's on the surface, but beyond that is interpreting what's a typical buyer in that market looking at. And in some cases, it defies logic. Or I shouldn't say logic, but, you know, for example, we see it here in the Red River Valley. We talk about it all the time. I talk about it here every year, the productivity indexes. They tell a little bit of a story, but they don't tell the whole story. And the reason for that is in North Dakota, they use wheat for the basis for those, because it's the only crop grown across the state. The issue gets to be, you know, we've become more of a corn and soybean and other kind of crops. And what it tends to do is it kind of distorts the heavier ground and gives it a higher rating. And we see some of the lighter ground that really grows tremendous corn and soybeans has a lower rating. And you know, that can affect things. And our job is to determine what's the typical buyer looking at. And even if that buyer is misinterpreting that information, well, that's what the market is doing. And even though this piece should be worth more than this piece, if the market is not recognizing that, that's our job to pick up on that and see that. So, you know, you get that argument, well, this piece is way better than that piece, a farmer might tell me. But I said, but the market isn't telling me that.
Ultimately, you need someone to write their name on the check, right?
Yeah, that's where hopefully we add value to that process.
No doubt we've had some challenges in this marketplace. See a few more land sales in the paper as we get it every week. Are we seeing forced sales, or the lenders, how are they hanging in there with some of on that part of it?
I haven't seen much movement with the lender or forced sales yet. Those typically come quite late in the sales season. Typically, you're looking February, March, you know. If you're in that situation, unfortunately, you're probably not running right into your lender as quick as you probably should. I've had more activity and inquiry about land sales this fall than the last 2 or 3 years. It's really been pretty aggressive, and people are looking to sell. It seems like the clientele that I'm talking with are a lot of maybe elderly landowners or maybe the second generation landowner who has inherited the land. And maybe there's multiple beneficiaries of that land that are at different stages of their life, and they're just wanting to divest of that investment and move on. I think there's some of those folks that are a bit afraid too, because what they hear in the press is that we've got low commodity prices, we've got bad weather, you know, farming's tough, and they're kind of like, well, let's get out while we can. And really what I'm seeing is that land values are really strong. I think it's going to be a really good fall for someone wanting to sell land. I think there's been enough ad hoc payments, and we've had a little bump up in commodity prices lately. I think there's going to be a good pool of buyers this fall.
You seem to be nodding your head, Scott.
I totally agree with these guys, absolutely. I have had some calls from individuals, all active farmers, fairly large farms, asking about alternative finance. So in each one of the farms is a little different situation. One was in Minnesota. He had 4 boys, and he said he's tried to do everything he could to run them off the farm, and they keep coming back. So you know, he was looking to expand, and his deal was the expansion he was looking at would have put his debt-to-equity ratio out of numbers that his conventional lender was promoting. So he was confident. He knew he could make it go, but he just, you know, he was interested in alternative financing. Had a couple other farms, you know, real rapid growth. Debt-to-equity was probably not exactly where the lenders wanted to see it. So you know, they weren't interested in selling land, but they were looking for alternative finance. So there's still, you know, cautious optimism out there, maybe more so on the farm than at the lender in some cases.
We've had this low interest environment for a long time, and the Fed basically has come out and said it's going to stay that way for like the next 5 years, the way they talked in their last Beige report. How does that impact, how does that influence us when we're looking at buying and selling land?
Well, I think it's had a huge influence. And as long as it stays low, you know, we were talking earlier about, you know, beginning farmers that, you know, may not typically be able to compete with that big farmer in an area, but there's the beginning farmer program that even brings that interest rate even lower. So that's a key component, because that, if that were to increase, then all of a sudden that makes, you know, stock market or something a little more appealing. But, you know, the thing is with land, it's going to be there. You know, it's not going to, 50% of it going to be gone one day with some unforeseen event in the stock market. So that's the value of land.
Let's switch, if we can, a little more on the rental side. How often, how long a term are we doing most cash rents at this point? Are we doing annual, 2-year? What are we seeing?
Sure. So the bulk of the leases that I do, Northeast, South Dakota, most of North Dakota, Western North Dakota, I typically see a 1-year lease. You know, it's part of my job is to you know, have a great relationship with the tenant as well as the landowner who we work for, assuring them that even though it's a 1-year lease, we have no intention of replacing a tenant. You know, it's a relationship. It allows us to respond a little bit quicker to the unknowns that happen. You get into Central North Dakota, Western North Dakota, they're more associated with a 3-year to a 5-year lease. So you know, we have to be adaptable to the markets as well. So,
has that changed over time? Was there? It seems like it wasn't so long ago where we had longer-term leases.
Absolutely, it has changed over time. You know, I've been in farming my entire life, and you know, when I was in farming, we used to do 3-year leases all the time, and sometimes we'd put it in writing. So, definitely some things have changed over time.
Is it difficult finding a new tenant for that land if that's needed?
There's still enough optimism out there that typically, no, it's not at all difficult to find a new tenant.
So the rental rates, have they held kind of correlation with the land values?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a, you know, for whatever reason, the rental rate is, I would consider it stable at this point in time. You know, back to a little bit about finding a new tenant. You know, one of the things we do, it's pretty unusual where we actually put land up for rent. We try and maintain our relationship with the existing tenants. One of the things that we do, though, if we do go public with it, sometimes we see a rental number that's just stupid. It doesn't make sense, and you know that's not good for anybody in the long run. So it has to be, there has to be profitability potential for that operator at all times as well.
It's such a different time where we've seen ad hoc disaster payments, we've seen you know, MFP and those kind of payments. From a landowner perspective, do they, what's that discussion? Do they get a share of any of those payments, or is that a touchy subject?
It's an interesting subject, to say the least. You know, it's more fun when the owner is engaged and paying attention to those things. Then they truly understand what's going on in the market. The bulk of the rents that we do, that we have in this region, are cash rents. The cash rent, there's a reason you have your knowns and you have security, and you may forfeit a little of the additional potential if there's an additional ad hoc payment or something like that. That's why the tenant's willing to pay that cash rent. So on the cash rent side, typically, no, they're not sharing in the governmental payments, the ad hoc payments, things like that. The crop share obviously is different than that.
I'm guessing you have a lot of the folks you're working with on the farm management side and such are those absentee landowners. Talk to me about that education process when they're getting to be one more generation removed from the farm.
It's all over the board. You know, there's some folks that I'll guarantee you they have no clue where their land is. Never seen it, probably no desire to see it. You know, maybe it's something, well, my folks said I can't sell it, so I just rent it, whatever. And there's other folks that take a very active interest in it. So what our goal is to work with that landowner in whatever their interest is in being a part of that farm. We encourage it, definitely.
So on land sales, is there best time that we should be selling land?
Well, you know, the typical sales period is typically right after harvest up until about spring planting, you know, our winter season. You know, when we had the run up in 11 and 12, we were selling land in July, August. It didn't matter when. You could sell land whenever you wanted. It was just in such hot demand. You know, it seems to me that still our typical sales period is from the end of harvest up until spring. That's when folks have gotten their crop in. They know where they're sitting at financially, typically, as far as buyers. It's typically when farm leases end in the fall of the year, and they can give notice to their tenant and say, hey, we're going to sell this land this winter, and you know, let them know that that's going to happen. So typically from basically now up until about the first part of April is when we get.
I will say the best time is the day after the market goes up 20%. So, you know, that's typical, but we will say that, you know, you never know either till after the fact, but that's, you know, I've had people try to hone in, like, you know, you try to cherry pick some perfect date in November after the beet payments come out or something like that, but, you know, it's you never know till after the fact.
Or the election.
Or the election. I had, you know, one where he wanted it
Either
after
before or after.
He might prove to be, I don't know if it's going to make a difference or not, but, you know.
We're all guessing on that game. There's oftentimes a farm tenant may have that first option to buy or the first right of refusal. How does that influence what we're doing here? Or does it?
Well, what I've found in any sales I've ever been associated with, it's a negative to the seller. I mean, I just got to be flat out honest about that. That puts a seed of doubt in the potential buyer's minds that they're actually going to sell the land to someone other than the tenant. You know, because you're going to go to a sale and someone's going to bid up this land to a point, and then it's going to be offered to someone else. So what's their motivation to go ahead and bid if they know it's going to be offered to someone else? So my experience working for a seller is that a right of first refusal is typically a negative for them.
Nobody wants to be used. their time wasted to set the price. So I mean, it sounds like a fair and equitable thing, you know, on the first onset, but when you look at those factors, you know, you put yourself in that buyer's perspective, it's, yeah, something to avoid.
On something like that, if that was in there, I would actually almost recommend if you have a first right of refusal, do it based off of an appraised value. Have a third-party independent come in and truly say, you know, this is the market price right now. If the tenant says yes, great. If he doesn't, put it up for sale.
Farmers National obviously is a national company, but you've got footprint all across this region. Educate me a little bit on the services. You've touched on a lot of them here today.
The main ones were, I mean, basically 30 states through the middle part of the country, but the main ones here obviously are farm management. We manage 2 million acres, I think, throughout the country. Farm management, real estate sales, farm appraisals. We do have co-op stock, trade American Crystal, ethanol stocks, those sorts of things. We do have oil and gas management, which would be in western North Dakota. I think, what are we in, 40 states or something like that, I think. None of us up here are real knowledgeable about that, but, you know, farm management, appraisals, and real estate sales are the big things here.
We've been talking a lot about the farmland. What about some of that recreational ground?
I'd say that's steadily been increasing. You know, it was hot, I don't know, before 2008. It just went up every year. 2008 came along and it went like this because you could just see it, a lot of people tapping into their ever-increasing home equity and buying rec land. But, you know, we've seen it, I'd say steady. It depends on what it is. Deer hunting ground brings the money. Waterfowl, I don't think so.
You know, in western
Location.
North Dakota, you'll have pheasant hunting,
Yeah.
and that can bring.
Yeah.
So usually there's CRP probably involved.
Yep.
Where we see the big money on maybe non-income producing land is, I would say, hunting land. You know.
The thing with recreational land is it typically has to be a cash buyer. Most lenders aren't looking to borrow money on something that's not income producing. So if you're going to be buying that, you're probably not going to be buying quarters or halves. You're going to be buying a 20 or a 40 acre chunk, you know, so you can afford it. And so it does kind of limit the potential pool of buyers.
Size goes up, price goes down,
Yeah.
in per acre.
You know, we started this conversation about the new normal. When we look at the land market, I think it's pretty consistent, but what are we looking at as we go forward in this quote-unquote new normal?
I say, we probably all have different answers, but I say expect the unexpected. That's what we've experienced this year. And technology is going to change rapidly, accelerated pace. So like we talked about the mode of sale, you know, a year ago, online auctions were just a new thing. Now everyone does them. So, but in the end, what have we said? The land value throughout the course of all those different changes has stayed stable. That's not to say it's going to do that forever, but to me, that emphasizes the value of owning the land. It's a hard asset that's going to be there. So, although some of those circumstances behind it might change, you know, that's going to be there. So.
I just think, you know, I'm a conservative farm kid from Cavalier County, North Dakota. So, you know, when I see some of the younger farmers in now, I'm just so impressed with them. They're into technology. They're into knowledge way more than when I was at that age of getting into farming. They're willing to take a lot of risk and rolling the dice and just saying, you know, I'm going to go for this, be knowledgeable in it. And if it doesn't work, you know what? Life goes on. And I don't know where most other people were at, but I know my parents and grandparents weren't that way. They were very conservative in their decisions. And they probably lost out on a lot of opportunity over those years. So I really see this next generation of farming to be, you know, not as conservative as what we are. So
I'm getting to be the age I don't enjoy technology advances as much as I used to when I was younger, but I really think that's a huge part of what's going forward. I think this COVID, I think, is going to accelerate that process. I think, obviously, even what we do for a living, we do more, you know, lease signing, things like that, more remote, a little bit less face-to-face. I think one of the things that we're going to see is outside money, Silicon Valley money, whatever money you want to call it, as they step into the ag sector. There's some brilliant people out there. They they're going to stumble on some of this technology from time to time, but if they're willing to stick with it, keep putting the money into it, they will get some technology advances that I think are going to be game-changing. I think the investors, I think absentee owners, rather than look at a quarter, they're going to look at profitability on each piece of that ground at some point in time. I think the lenders are going to come to the farmers or the owners, and they're going to say, you know, not what can you produce, what will that produce? Where's the profit? What's the profitability? I think there's some big changes coming, and while there's more risk involved, I think there's more answers to a lot more of the variables through the technology. Obviously, there's some weather. You know, we try and predict it, things like that. Markets we try and predict, but being able to truly track it and continue to layer that information year after year, all of that data gets to be more accurate over time. And I'm excited about that.
I was going to say, it seems like there's some excitement when we're looking forward on this.
Yeah.
Even for guys like us that don't get too excited about technology sometimes, right?
Yep.
So where are you guys located here in the show?
Exhibition Hall in the northwest part of the grounds.
Now, we've got the online audience for folks that want to get in connection with the three of you or anybody else from Farmers National. What do they have to do, Kyle?
FarmersNational.com, 1-800 number, and ask for Fargo office, Grand Forks office, or they'll send you in the right direction if you tell them what you're looking for.
Well, gentlemen, we appreciate you being with us.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kyle Nelson, Dale Weston, Scott Hitter, again from Farmers National. The new normal, what's new in the land market? Again, you'll be able to follow this online as well. Just go to the Red River Farm Network's website, rrfn.com, and go to the Big Iron tab, and you'll find all of our forums there as well. Again, thanks for joining us. We'll be back with more here on the Red River Farm Network.